Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
See you all. Okay. Thank you all for coming out to see Mary Ellen.
Yeah.
What we're going to talk about is, seeing the screen, Southport Scoundrels. I did this presentation about 5 years ago, and when I found that Mary Ellen wasn't going to make it, I went through my files and said, I like this. We had a good time when we were in this presentation. But again, but it says Southport Scoundrels. I can see, you're kind of like scoundrels, Southport. That can't be. That can't be. Well, you're right. There are no scoundrels that I can find who were native born to Southport. It's kind of a boring crew. So if you were questioning the title of tonight's presentation, you all know that Southport never had any scoundrels, or at least any homegrown ones. Things in different places. Definition of a scoundrel. Let me back up. What I'm going to do is present about stories about four or five or six people, and then we're going to talk about whether we think they were scoundrels or not. So, kind of to do that, you need, I think, you need a definition of what is a scoundrel. I went to my wife's big red Merriam-Webster dictionary that I hadn't seen for many years. And I looked up the definition of scoundrel. Disreputable, not considered to be a respectable in character. I thought, well, that's fine, but I don't really know what that means. So what I did is I looked up character. And as you can see, the complex of mental and ethical traits making and often individualizing a person, group, or a nation. I think that's a very fine definition, and the Merriams and Mr. Webster must be very proud of that definition because it has a 15-letter word. I still don't know what it all means, but it has a 15-letter word. That's an accomplishment. I'm very proud of that. So, as I was going on, I wasn't comfortable with what I was reading and seeing about the definition of what scoundrel is. So I decided to make up my own. And those are the last two I put on there. So a good person is a person who helps other people. A bad person, or a scoundrel, is a person who harms other people. You good with that to go ahead and do this analysis? All right. I'm good. I'm glad. Next thing we need to do is look at what are the synonyms for scoundrel. Now that's really a crowded slide. So let me read these for you, and you might want to read along with me. But bad egg, stinker, rat fig, rotter, bounder, blighter, turd, mugger, tad, ne'er-do-well, blackguard, knave, dastard, vagabond, varlet, rapscallion, rogue, rascal, good for nothing, reprobate, swindler, fraudster, trickster, charlatan, villain, beast, SOB, rat, louse, swine, dog, cur, hound, skunk, heel, snake, wretch, scumbag, meaning, scamp, batty, brute, liar, cheat, and a creep. Anybody have anything else to add to that list?
Good list.
It's pretty definitive.
Good list. Then we can go forward. Ah. How many of you are acquainted or aware of Major General Robert Howe Sr.?
Vaguely.
Quite a few of us. Quite a few of us. Here's some of his background, so we get the idea. We try to determine whether he is a scout. He was a scoundrel. He, in his early career, he was a commander in Southwest Sea, 1766, commander at Fort Johnston. Almost a decade later, he led the burning and the destruction of Fort Johnston as a member of the local militia. And 2 years past that, he became commander of the Southern Department of the Continental Army. Continental Army had 3 departments, essentially divided the colonies into 3 regions. Interesting, he took that position, or became the commander of that position when his colleague and Brunswick County resident James Moore had that position, and then he passed away. So Howe was appointed as a follow-up. So he had the position in 1777. In 1778, just a year later, he lost the battle at Savannah, and he lost his command. Why did he lose his command? Well, some people feel that Howe was a good general, not a great general, and that they needed someone with a little more umps to do that. And that may be true that he wasn't a good general, but not a brilliant general. But he absolutely, however, old Bob was a notoriously brilliant womanizer, infamous throughout the colonies. Infamous. Scandal. Howe and his wife divorced after 18 years of marriage. An unheard of action in colonial times. Janet Shaw. I'm going to quote Janet Shaw. Janet Shaw, she was a British woman, a lady of quality, who toured the North Carolina and Virginia colonies and Antigua from 1774 to 1776. Janet Shaw said, after meeting Major General Robert Howe Sr., that this gentleman has the worst character. He is deemed a horrid animal, and he devours women that come his way. Maybe, but I posit to you that perhaps he did not treat the Southport ladies that way. Why would I say that? Well, because there's a memorial stone in the Smithville burying ground honoring Robert Howe Sr. There's also a house street in Southport. One of the two major streets, is House Street. But that is not named after Robert Howe Sr. It's named after Robert Howe Jr. Robert Howe Jr. was one of the first commissioners for the town of Smithville, along with Potts, along with Dry, along with Lord. So he was one of the 5 or 6 commissioners. Robert Howe Jr. and the street was named after those various streets were named after those various.
Excuse me, was there a Goss in that group? A Goss?
There was not a Gauze Street. He was in that. He was in that group.
He was in the
Not
group.
in that. Yeah, Charles, probably your neighbor.
Oh, since I've interrupted you, there used to be an area in Brunswick County called Howes Point. Today it's called Sunset Harbor. When I was growing up, it was Howes Point.
I don't know.
It wasn't spelled that way. It wasn't
H-A-R-R-E.
spelled that way. W-E. Okay. So, all right.
So Janet Shaw was a visitor to North Carolina in 1774-76, and she kept a journal of her trip. She was well educated and an outspoken critic. In this instant, Janet Shaw's quote certainly seems to put Howe into the CAD category, C-A-D, of a scoundrel. So he was someone who behaves dishonorably, especially towards women. Fair enough. What do we think? Was he a scoundrel? Was he a cad?
For me to say.
Hard to judge someone from 250 years away.
Well, if he lost Savannah, he's not a very good guy.
This is an advertisement. This is an advertisement for the Susie Carson online research room. Because Janet Shaw's journal of a Lady of Quality is Janet Shaw. It is on our research room. It's free. You can go and read it all you want. It's free. And it is really very interesting. Very interesting. She was not only, well, she was sardonic. She had a tendency to mock, or to be cynical about things. And not only about people, but about conditions here in the colony, in the North Carolina colony, in Brunswick County. Here's what she had to say about Fort Johnson. I see guns peeping through the sticks. If these are our fortresses and castles, no wonder the natives rebel. For I will be bound to take this fort with a regiment of blackguard Edinburgh boys without any artillery but their own pop guns. And again, as I said, that journal is available on the Susie Carson online research.
I may be the only one in here that doesn't know this, but where was Fort Johnson?
Fort Johnson was and is in Southport, really central to the town. It's right on Bay Street, which runs along the river. It now has the remaining building that was originally built in 1810, is the garrison building, which was the officers' quarters. That building survives. In the 1950s, they made it look like a plantation home. So it doesn't really not appear as like a fort. That's not, when you see it, it's not the first reaction you would have. It was a fort in service from 1764 was when it was actually completed, through 2006, when the land and the building was turned over to the city of Southport. And it's now the home of the Southport, Fort Johnson Southport Museum and Visitors Center. Now, most everyone knew before we started who Robert Howe is. I think this one's going to be a little more challenging. Lanier Cravens was a scoundrel. Several years ago, I wrote a small book titled "How Many Muffins and Oyster Pie," and it is about the lives and times of Southport women at the turn of the 20th century. 57 women contributed recipes to a 1907 St. Philip's Church cookbook. Lanier Cravens, his wife Agnes Cravens, was one of those 57 women. As part of my book, I did a short bio. I tried to do a short bio of all of the women. I was fairly successful, but I was able to find information about 54 of those women, and Agnes Cravens was one. And it was through Agnes that I became introduced to her husband, Lanier. Lanier Cravens was a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army stationed at Fort Caswell. When he was at Fort Caswell, he was responsible for the reconstruction of the fort from the military side. He was there for a total of, and they were in and living at Fort Caswell for a total of 2 years, 2007 to 2009. In those 2 years, First Lieutenant Lanier Cravens was court-martialed twice. First time for being a drunkard, and the second time, as the slide says, he was found guilty for a payroll violation. So, young man, first lieutenant, on a twice court-martial. That's not the most surprising thing. The most surprising thing is his sentence was commuted. Each sentence was commuted by Theodore Roosevelt. Yes, I have spent a lot of time trying to find a connection between, whether a family connection or what, between Roosevelt and this Lanier Cravens. Closest I can come is as in 1898, Lanier Cravens was a non-commissioned officer in Cuba at the same time that Roosevelt was in Cuba. After his stint in Fort Caswell, in 1914, Lanier Cravens becomes a very early casualty in World War I. He's killed in Belgium. He had left the U.S. Army and he had joined the Canadian Army as a non-commissioned officer. And that's why he was in the battle in World War I in 1914. He had stayed in the U.S. Army. Of course, it would have been a few years later, whether it was armed, where our troops, U.S. troops, were embarked in armed conflict. Following, it's a little more interesting on his wife's side as well. I'd say 20 years after she left Fort Caswell and Southport, Agnes Cravens, who was an Irish immigrant, she became the directress of the Red Cross in New York City. She also lived with her daughter, Fairfax, in an apartment about a block away from Central Park, Manhattan. Her daughter was an interior decorator, never married. And so, I know these dribs and drabs I'm doing. The final one I've been able to find is that Agnes and her daughter, Fairfax, annually traveled to London, first class, on the Queen Mary. Now, let's go back to 1907, 1909, or go back to 1898 when they married and they lived in a boarding house in Wisconsin. And you go on in years, and you have identified a woman, an immigrant, who seems to have done very, very well over her lifetime. And I would like to know more of her story as much as I'd like to know more of his story. So, we get back to the question: was Lanier Cravens a scoundrel? Court-martialed twice, found guilty twice. Hard to say.
What was the charge in reference to there was a money issue at some point? He was convicted of malfeasance, the use of money or something.
Well, he drew, at one point, he drew 2 pennies. And it said, and then it says in that clip, he repaid what was still found guilty, but he repaid.
What does that mean, the reduction of 93 finals in lineal rank? What does that mean?
His rank as a first lieutenant, that's where he was in the list of first lieutenants.
Okay.
Seniority. It's a seniority list. Okay. So essentially, there had to be 98 first lieutenants. They dropped them to the bottom.
Okay.
By our definition, it's hard to say that he hurt himself mostly. But the other thing is, one of the synonyms was cheater, to cheat, so to be a cheater. And it seems, the one thought I had is, he didn't believe that the rules pertained to him. And he tried then to cheat the rules.
Where was he born?
November 1998, he was 22 or so. So what that puts you in the late 1860s, early 1870s.
So what area or town was he a native of?
Milwaukee,
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Actually, his father was a judge. It was a wealthy, well-to-do family. even with parents and witnesses questioning why he joined the U.S. Army and why his wife, he took an Irish immigrant as his wife. Was
Well,
Benjamin Smith a scoundrel? When? How can you say that? Okay, so Benjamin Smith, the town of Smithville, which is now Southport, named after him, and he was the governor of North Carolina. He was certainly the richest man in this part of the country. But was he a scoundrel? Let's look at this little sequence of events. And first, he receives 12,000 acres of land in what is in today's Tennessee, very close to the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. And he received that 12,000 acres of land for his service in the Revolutionary War. So step one. Two, North Carolina University was chartered on December 11th, 1789. And then 7 days later in 1789, Trustee Smith, so he was a trustee of the university, donates 20,000 acres of his Tennessee land plus some North Carolina land. So the original 12,000 was Tennessee, and then there was another 6 that was in North Carolina. So he donated that land to the University of North Carolina. Four days later, on December 22nd, 1789, North Carolina ceded all of her Tennessee land to the U.S. government. So he essentially had the land, or the university had the land for 4 days. Then it was ceded to the U.S. government. Even today, we applaud his gift of 12,000 acres, or 20,000 acres. We applaud that action by Benjamin Smith.
I guess the question is,
But did the university ever receive Smith's donation?
but did he know North Carolina was the land?
I
He may
can't,
not
I'm
have
sorry.
known that. He may not have known that North Carolina was going to cede all of the land to the U.S. government. And that's a big question.
He was a member of the North Carolina legislature. I'm not saying anything.
Yeah.
He was in a position, a location,
Yeah.
to know.
Benefit of the doubt.
Did the university ever receive the income? That's the answer to that question is yes and no. In 1911, 1912, the New Madrid earthquake hit 7 to 8 point magnitude for that earthquake, 1811, 1812. And what it did was permanently flood most of those 12,000 acres. So, yeah, they got the acres, but they couldn't really do much with it. So that's why I say it's yes or no. And from this evidence, I'm saying it appears that Smith might, maybe have been a scoundrel. Gwen immediately said he was a scoundrel. But
And we tell more of the story.
There's more stories to
Is
be
this
told.
not the reference to what we call the lost state of Franklin? This land was what was gonna be the state called Franklin. But because it was right on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee.
Right.
I don't know if he was a scoundrel, but I think he was a guilty.
Well, let's look at him in one more situation. And that's his connection with James Reed. And as you can see, early in the Revolution, Smith was in a unit commanded by James Reed. Now, socially, James Reed was on a much lower level than what Benjamin Smith was on. Which kind of leads to what's the word? Flaunted. He flaunted his wealth, his money. He was very, very proud. Not proud that he had earned it, but proud that he had it. But he didn't earn it. So Smith later loaned money to Reed. That, for Smith, with Reed as a debtor, Smith could then have the feeling that proper order was in place. Because now the person on the lower level of society was in debt to the person on the higher level of society. A little later, Reed is appointed tax collector of the Port of Brunswick town. Smith signs a surety and guarantees any debt that Reed encounters. 3 years later, Reed is audited and he owes the state the equivalent of $3 million. The actual amount was 15,000 pounds, equivalent to $3 million. I like the last line. Reed, ever the swindler, dies and Smith is ruined. So is he a scoundrel? No, but Reed is.
Bad judge of character.
Reed is. And Smith is the target. Yeah, fine.
So did Smith make any money when that land was ceded to the U.S. government?
I don't know that.
It seems very generous that the university would just take this 4-day-old gift and say, "Oh, here."
Well, I've worked for Penn State University for 30 years. I know that the University of North Carolina would want that money. All right, next is E.M. Rosafi. I don't have much information about this man except what Susie Carson tells us in her book, and what Larry Meisel, another former president of the Historical Society, writes in this book. This is before we were clean. And he did about 80 interviews in the process of doing this book. It is just full of the good stuff. It's good reading. It's interesting, and it, I think, picks up a lot of things you would not find elsewhere. Okay, so E.M. Rosafi, who we believe was a Hungarian immigrant. Pretty sure it was either. Well, he was carpetbagger if he wasn't himself. Okay. So in 1865, in the Civil War, he was a captain in the 1st West Virginia Light Artillery. 1868, Captain Rosafi becomes the Justice of the Peace in Brunswick County. in 1868, he's sent to jail for unlawfully seizing property. And you can see this pattern. He gets something good and then something bad, something good and then something bad. So in 69, he's found guilty of false imprisonment, and later he's tried on a charge of forcible trespass. And then in 1869, still was a very busy year. He's appointed as the mail agent for the Wilmington and Manchester Railroad. 1870, caused a riot and was ejected from the Brunswick County Republican meeting. Later in 1870, becomes a candidate for the North Carolina Senate, and then he is named Customs Inspector. Three years later, he's dismissed from his job as Customs Inspector. And in 1874, he's reappointed as Inspector of Customs, and his wife was appointed Smithville's postmistress. In 1876, he was the postmaster in Smithville, and then in 1877, the story changes, and he's appointed to a position in the Patent Office in Washington, D.C., at a very respectable salary of $2,000 a year. Was he a scoundrel? Seems like he was, and his specialties seem to be fraud and swindling. Now, here's a Brunswick County guy. Jesse C. Walker. Jesse Walker shot and killed Brunswick County Sheriff Jackson Stanland in 1908. So, as the song goes, Jesse would have said, "I shot the sheriff, but I didn't shoot the deputy." So most likely he was born in Columbus County, North Carolina, and then in 1882 or 83, and maybe he was born in Georgia. It seems that throughout his lifetime he goes back and forth. So in 1905, he married 17-year-old Rosalie Leonard, whose father, Frank, owned a hard goods store and farmland in the Charlotte area. And despite his marriage and the birth of a child, Walker remained a drifter who was wanted by the law for a variety of low-level crimes, including breaking into local stores. Plus, the U.S. Army was looking for him because he was a deserter. So in late November of 1908, the county sheriff, Jackson Stanland, and his deputies cornered Walker at Walker's father-in-law's house near Charlotte. The arrest went bad, and his father-in-law's house, the arrest went bad, and Walker shot Stanland, and Stanland died the next day. Sheriff Stanland's murder set off a series of episodes that made headlines for the next 25 years. And let me show you that. So we know, I mentioned 1908, Walker murders Sheriff Jackson Stanland. He was captured and jailed in Southport. And of course, he was jailed in 1908 was the new Brunswick County Jail, which we now call the old Brunswick County Jail. And it's a museum operated by the Southport Historical Society. So in 1909, Walker escapes from the Brunswick County Jail. that new jail, and he escaped. Such nerve. Later in 1909, he's convicted. He's never tried. The reason he was at Brunswick County Jail is he was awaiting trial, which was not going to be for another three months. So when he escaped, he had not been tried for murder in Brunswick County. So going to 1909, he's convicted of a second murder in Oklahoma. He's participating in a train robbery, and he shoots and kills another officer of the law. In 1914, he escapes from Oklahoma prison. So now he's got 2 murders and 2 escapes on his record. So in 1914, he escapes from Oklahoma prison. 1915, he's arrested in Wilmington and convicted of then goes to court. He's convicted of murder in the death of Sheriff Stanley. It's 1950. In 1919, in jail for 4 years, 1919, he escapes not from the Little Brunswick County prison, he escapes from the state penitentiary in Raleigh. That, after 1919, he disappears. And where he disappeared to is Gulfport, Mississippi, and he starts a new life in Gulfport, Mississippi. In 1932, after he experienced a biblical conversion, he comes back to Raleigh, comes back to the doors of the state prison, and asks to be allowed in, essentially. That's 1932. In 1936, Jesse Walker is paroled by the state of North Carolina and also by the state of Oklahoma. Let's recap. It's easy. 2 murders, 3 escapes, and you parole him and later pardon him. 3 men. 2 murders, 3 escapes, 2 murders of police officers. Are you kidding me? You can get mad about that. Get mad about it. So, is Jesse Walker a scoundrel? I don't care if he was a scoundrel, he's a murderer. Murderer. And a fraud. And I suspect he was a fraud as well. So those are the folks that some we determined might be scoundrels, some are scoundrels, were scoundrels. But I think it's a quick trip through criminal justice system over the centuries.
My great grandfather was in the posse the day the sheriff was killed. His name was Aaron White, but everybody called him Ayers White.
There's a book out about that.
Yeah, I need to see that sometime.
And the description of the shooting in the Leonard house seemed that Walker had a military pistol. He had been in the Army for a very short period of time, so they figured that somehow he stole that pistol. I'm not that well. It kept on firing, or he kept on firing. Until the pistol was empty. The sheriff didn't have much of a chance. And I said that did die. This is written by a fellow named Mark Koenig. Mark was the director of the Railroad Museum in Wilmington. He now lives in Cleveland.
What's his name?
Last year, he's written this book, and then he also, about a year ago, he came out with a book on the Wilmington, Brunswick, and Southern Railroad. That was the railroad that was in Southport from 1913 through the early 1940s.
Who's the author of that?
Mark Koenig.
Yeah, he spoke to us previously and said his book would be out this fall. And he would come back and speak
Koenig.
on it.
And then if you're not amateur historian, there's some words to live by. The work of a historian is not the work of a critic or a moralist. It is the work of a sleuth, storyteller, philosopher, and the scientist, the keeper of tales, the sayer of sooth, and the teller of truth. And Jill Lepore and Dr. Lepore is a publishing working professor at Yale University. And, one more advertisement. Southport historical programs are coming up in September and October. Tuesday talk at the Harper Library on the 17th, and Walker Shannon, who is a relatively new staff member at the Maritime Museum, that presentation. September 28th is one of our evening speaker meetings, and the saga of Jesse Walker and the author Mark Koenig will be giving that presentation. October 9th, Desiree Bridge will be talking about Civil War medicine. That's during the day. And then October 24th, Saturday, October 24th, there is about 10 members of the Southport Historical Society who portray different people who are buried in the old Smithville burying ground. I portray a man who was mayor of Southport in the 1920s. He was then a county commissioner. Actually, he was head of the county commissioners for a period of time. And then from 1935 to 1945, he was the postmaster in Southport. Two important things happened while he was postmaster, and he was the federal government's representative in Southport. I think you'd say the county, and that's the Depression and World War II. So it was an exciting time for Mayor Leonard T. Gaskell, who happens to be from Larian. That would be for our hometown of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Although his last name was not Gaskell when he left Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, it was Jacko-Slavich. Write that down in your notes. All right. Well, you'll have fun there. It's a good afternoon, and we enjoyed doing it.
Carol said she's one of the voices also. She's going to do Sempronius Russ's wife.
I'll be Sempronius is Russ's wife, and his wife and two of his daughters, the voices
Okay, looking forward to that. Well, thank you for your entertainment and humoring me as well. As we have.